So my name is Kyle Ray from Fraser High School. My topic that I picked for the professional development is research-based practices to increase student engagement and achievement. The reason I'm interested in this topic is kind of Fraser School District has a pretty common track record in mathematics of scoring pretty well above county and state levels in elementary. And then at middle school, kind of takes a bit of a dip. And then the high school, it climbs back up to being about county level and maybe slightly above. So this PD is focused on mathematics 100%. And in particular, the students that are at risk or have a disability. So it's how do we get that group to um, achieve better and take part in class more often. We have about 40 to 60 students in our high school that we put in a tier 2 or tier 3 MTSS course. And I think that really hitting that area can help us achieve a lot of our school improvement plan goals, which is next year a 2% increase, but eventually the state has the mathematics goal at about a 50% proficiency rate by 2024. So that's roughly about a 2% increase from here until that year. Um, we also have a 40% free and reduced population and a large special education population at Fraser High School. In terms of our school plans and goals, we're very much on the way into competency-based learning and trying to personalize learning the best we can. So much of what this research talks about fits into that personalizing for our students. And this PD is meant to be a half day from about 12 to 2:30 is the format that we usually do for PD as teachers return back to school from the summer. And the goal is to try to get that 6-12 vertical alignment and those discussions to start happening. So as we go through this presentation, I'm going to slide things over and open random documents. So the first one I'm going to open is my agenda that I have set up for the professional development. So a basic overview here. For the first 5 minutes, it's a welcome staff and have them sit in topic groups. Sitting in topic groups is important because they're going to be doing a lot of work with each other in their particular topic field, for instance, Algebra 2 or Algebra 1 or geometry. I've also will ask them to bring a lesson, a performance task, an assessment, an activity, one thing from each teacher to bring with them. So my hopes is that they listen to that and they all have something to partake in the PD. So then I go through the start of the presentation and break down some of the best practices that I've found from the research I'm doing with definitions. I'm going to provide what I feel is a practical example of how they can incorporate all of these themes that we're going to talk about in a minute into their lessons without having to do anything really overtly burdensome, because that's when things fall apart. Then I'm going to give the staff some time to work on possible adaptations that they can do with the lessons and activities that they brought with them and have a chance to hash that out with their topic groups and even groups from the middle school and the high school. After that, I'm going to give them some time to reflect on what we talked about and record their thoughts in a Blackboard discussion board. Fraser High School in our district is actually very, very well versed on Blackboard, and we use it all the time, which is why I would house it in that program. Now I'm going to move on to the best teacher team practices as a second facet to this whole thing and define some areas. It could almost be like a PLC discussion. But our building's used to the word PLC, and I think it's lost its luster, I guess, over the years with a lot of iterations. A lot of people call things PLC just when they're just talking amongst a group. So we're going to try to define some of those terms back. And then I'm going to give some reflection time on that process. And I'm going to discuss some follow activities after that, and then we'll close with about 20 minutes of the math group 612 being able to talk and figure out how they can define some of those roles and work out a systematic approach to a secondary math curriculum. All right, so we go back over to my PD side. This is the PowerPoint that I would have at the professional development, and we're going to walk through this as I talk through my plan for the PD. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about how there are two key facets, two areas that need to be considered when we're looking at trying to engage students and increase achievement, and that's what you do inside the classroom and what you do outside of the classroom. So how are we in the lesson, in the structure, supporting the learning and engagement for those who struggle or lack interest? And then outside of the classroom, what are we doing to constantly reflect, analyze, renew, implement different ideas and keep things current so we don't start strong and then fade away? So the first part is focusing on what we do inside the classroom. But before I get to that point, I do want to stress to the group that I know the common concerns. In Wexler, Reed, Pyle, Mitchell, and Barton documented these concerns in a research article that I had found. And they're pretty common and get brought up often. It's the pressure to cover a large amount of material in mathematics. Sometimes the adaptations and accommodations that are presented are very difficult to do and keep the curriculum flowing. And sometimes there's that debate of, well, you don't want to the mile wide and inch deep conversation, but there's also a balance to that. You do need to get through curriculum. You can't miss out on a majority of learning because then you're putting students even further behind. So what we're going to talk about today is definitely keeping that in mind, accommodations that don't stall that process. Must maintain content rigor, large amount of students at secondary level. Our teachers at Fraser High School have anywhere from 180 to about 200 students on their caseload. So that's a lot. Limited resources in some schools, and then student apathy, and that's what we're trying to address. So my hope is that the practical example that I'm providing today and the topics we're talking about in this PD are things that staff don't see as just being in addition to or overburdensome. So the common themes I found in the research that I've looked at thus far is the increased motivation and achievement for these at-risk and students with disabilities is the following list. We have explicit instruction, structured collaboration, differentiated support, use of visuals, think alouds, formative assessment, use of multiple methods, opportunities to verbalize mathematics. Now, just to show you one of the handouts that I wanted to give is the best practice definitions. So they have a clear understanding of what we're talking about, and I would also discuss it in the PD itself. For sake of this presentation, I know we're about 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go over all those, but that would be one of the handouts that I had. Key things to consider in this: structured collaboration is having students work in groups and giving them specific roles, or doing think, pair, shares, or reciprocal reading. A lot of the reading activities that you do to enhance literacy have been found to actually help in mathematics as well, but there's also been times in research that they have not been found to have much of an effect at all. What I've been running into is a lot of the research on mathematics in this specific field is very new. There's a ton of it on the literacy aspect, but the mathematics aspect is not as much. The formative assessment was definitely something that's repeated more often and using that effectively, and opportunities to actually verbalize the mathematics. So the real meat of this PD is getting into the practical example. I wanted the staff to see how they could accommodate all those things without having to bounce their heads off the wall. So what I want to show you is there's 3 handouts here. We're going to start with one. Here's an original task that, let me enhance the size. Here's an original task with no type of differentiation. It's something that our math department could create on its own. The original question is something you would see in a typical textbook. It's basically talking about students that are climbing a mountain. They're currently 36 feet up the mountain, and they climb at a specific rate of 12 feet each hour. And then it asks simple questions like, how high will you be after 3 hours, 4.5 hours, 6.2 hours? How long will it take to reach the top if the top is 158 feet high? So part of getting into verbalizing math and actually putting something into your lesson that accommodates a collaboration time is asking simple things like record your initial thought on how to answer these questions. This is a form of a think aloud. Estimate your answer to each of the questions and explain your reasoning. This is them verbalizing mathematics. So all students will have some type of an idea, and you urge them to have any type of an idea, even if they don't know how to get a logical answer. At least they're starting to build a thought process. So by adding on additional questions and processes to this simple textbook question, we really already enhance this lesson. We go on to have them talk about what a variable is, identify the variables. We're not telling them what they are. And then multiple representations, multiple ways to do the problem, which is another theme. We're making them do a table, a graph, and an equation. Here are the questions. There's a table. How would you answer it based on that table? Here's a graph that you're providing. How would you make the graph? How can we use the graph to get our answers? Let's write an equation. How do we use the equation to get those answers? And then we have reflection. What do you notice about the answers you get from each method? They'll see that some are estimates, some are harder to be more accurate. The equation is the most accurate. These are the follow-up questions that we're getting. And then finally, it's a shift in, well, what happens if I change one of those numbers? How does that change a table, a graph, and an equation? So we're really getting into deeper thinking. Now, I know the idea is how do we actually get the at-risk students and the special ed students to contribute to this? And this is where the formative assessment piece comes in. So I'm going to keep this window open so that we can compare. So the idea is going into this lesson, you've already done the explicit instruction. You've talked about the nuts and bolts of what a slope-intercept equation is and all those little definitions. And now you actually want them to apply it. So we want the engagement heavily at this point. So with formative assessment along that way, we've been able to find where students need additional help, and we can kind of chunk them into 3 groups. So this is an original task. So our hope is everyone could follow this task. So then we have a task, level 2 task, I call it. So the idea here is we don't want it to look as if this packet is any different than any other students, but we know that it is. If we compare, same question, same front sheet, everybody we're going to ask to record initial thought and to estimate answer to each question. But when we move down to the second page, and to keep the other page up as a comparison, the second question is, why are they variables? Well, we're helping them, we're answering that. Maybe these students that we found have trouble with actually understanding what that definition is. So a variable is something, we use units that are changing in the situation. So with that base knowledge, go back to the problem. The other version, the original version, doesn't give you that base knowledge. Same thing in part B. I'm saying the independent is the one that's not affected by something else. So we're kind of coaching up. When we go to the table, I'm telling them how to set up this table generically, as opposed to the other one. I just want them to set it up. I want them to know how to do it. With the graph, same idea. I'm telling them how to label their axes so they get an idea of how to start setting up that graph. And then the equation, I'm defining the type of equation to write, what the variables in the equations mean. So it's that level 2, it's that push. So instead of sitting there doing nothing, they have a guide for them to do it. So that's going to improve engagement and confidence and allow them to be able to participate in the discussion. And then for our most struggling learners, we have a level 3 task. Again, you'll see the very first page is the exact same as everybody's. So all the questions are pretty much set up the same. So the point is to allow them to be more active in the class and to give them prompts so they're not sitting and waiting for the teacher to get around to them. This one you can see is definitely more guiding. It's almost as if I'm sitting next to them telling them what to do, but they're reading it and interpreting my directions to do it. So this says the variables in the scenario, I give them to them because these students I'm really finding have a hard time with that. And through practice of these, eventually I can get them up to a level 2 or back to the level 1. So I give them what the variables are and why, and then I want them to define what's independent and dependent. On the table, you notice I set up the table. I give them an example of how one row would work. In the problems, how high will you and your friends be 3 hours from now? How will you and your friends be 4.5 hours from now? I give them a guideline in the parentheses. Use what you know about the height at 4 hours and 5 hours to help you answer 4.5. So it's letting them know it's okay to estimate in that stance. And some students might not feel very comfortable doing that. On the graph, I break it down even more, tell them what exactly to write on each axis. You'll notice I put scales on the graph. So if that's a difficulty I found that they had, putting a scale on the graph isn't the meat that I want pulled out of this lesson. It's what do we interpret from these linear models, right? So I don't want them to get hung up on these minute details. I want them to be able to focus on the key. And again, I give them some help on how to read a graph to estimate these answers. And on the equation, I'm also telling them very specific how to set up the equation. And then you'll see here exactly how to use that equation to get an answer. But on all 3 examples, the first page and all the reflection are the exact same. So students are going through that guided practice at differentiated levels, almost at tiered levels, and it's going to allow them to be more comfortable and have conversations with their peers and have conversations as a whole group. So that collaborative model can really be there. But we can't do this without formative assessing. So yes, we have 3 different models, but if we already have the one document created, we're really just creating another 2 levels with a minor tweaks. We can make these adaptations in 15, 20 minutes. So I think it's a very nice practical model to follow. So after that piece, we move on to having an activity reflection where I want them to post those on discussion board like I mentioned earlier. I want it to be viewable but also anonymous. This may be a Google Doc as well. I debated between each of them. The Google Doc may be more anonymous, but I want everybody to see everyone's input and I want to see their input. So then we move into the outside the classroom, changing team structures, increase opportunities for collaboration, increase instructional and assessment support, routinely analyze data, commitment level, collective inquiry, and continual learning. These are all aspects of a PLC model, and that's what all these relate to. How is your topic team addressing all of these concerns? Because they've all been found that when done with fidelity and with a high level of commitment, they do lead to student achievement. So I do have a definition sheet here as another handout. The team definitions, where I go through and I do define all those again, for the purposes of this overview, I don't need to read that, but these would be one of the handouts I would have in class for everyone to reflect on, and I would have at the PD. So after a discussion on that, I'd have a reflection where I would want the teams to talk about what of those themes are they already doing, or how can they incorporate the ones that they're not doing, and how can we best assist them in doing those, and what do they need? What if they need time? What time do they need? So yeah, I really want them to dig deep into thinking about how they can run this effectively and what supports they would need. So that would be a big part of that reflection. Again, that would go on a Google Doc or a discussion board. So the follow-up, it's a long list, but I think this is something important. It's really something I'm thinking about initiating as part of the practicum process that I'm going to do in the fall. So I really wanted to think this through. I want our teams in the math department to really define their roles. How is each person in that team going to be accountable for something valuable to the team, that they don't start slacking off and everybody knows that they can go to that person for that role? The team meeting agendas, I think that's important. Define your norms, define exactly what we're going to talk about at every meeting. How are we going to assess data? What are we going to do with the data? Unit overviews focused on best practices. I would like for every unit to list how often or when those best practice themes are being put into place and in what capacity. Observations, obviously I want to enhance the number of observations I want to do for the math department, many just being informal to provide feedback. I'd like to meet with the department head monthly to get an idea of the status of the team as a whole, or sometimes just to reflect and bounce ideas off of each other. Structured formative assessment model, like the practical example I discussed with you all, that doesn't happen without formatively assessing the students and getting an idea of how we can adjust those assignments to meet the needs to help students be able to engage. So it's important that there's a quick, easy, built-in way, one that teachers don't have to grade. We can use Blackboard to do, basic skills assessment to figure out where those basic skills are lacking that stop them from being able to engage, and to really get into the deeper thinking. Future professional development, that's a call for me asking them what they feel they need, and for me to use them to present to our staff about all the good things that are happening in the data that we're getting. And then data reports. I feel it's important that upon request, the formative assessment data and the summative assessment data should be at the ready, for anybody really to analyze and look at trends. So that will summarize my PD plan. I did, like I mentioned at the beginning, for the agenda, have time at the end for them to work as a 612 system to work on vertical alignment. The final piece to this is an evaluation piece. I did create an evaluation. I will actually go to the link. For purposes of a turn-in document, I typed the questions from an online survey I created here, but I will show you the online survey. Yeah. Let me copy and paste that. So here's the survey that I created to provide quick feedback and to record it in one place. So 3, 4 Likert scale questions. How useful did you find this training? How practical do you find the material today? How comfortable are you doing the work needed to achieve what we discussed? And then I said, there's 3 things you learned today that you can implement immediately. 3 things you feel you still need more practice with. What do you wish you could have more professional development on? anything you thought you were going to learn today and did not. I think that's an important one. I know when I hear about a topic, I get excited to learn some things, and then I'm kind of disappointed that they weren't discussed. So I feel that's important to know moving forward. And then what can be done with this training to make it more meaningful in the future. So I just wanted it to be simple for them that they could type. We're kind of a techie that way and nerdy that way, but a lot of it is we like to have it pulled together to save time. So that is my PD plan and my PD presentation. Again, I apologize I could not be there today, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.